I think education is unrecognized as a challenge. And so thank you for coming. And thank you if you are active in your country, if you're active in Liga, when it comes to this critical part of what we do, then thanks for making the time. And if you're listening to this as a podcast or as a recording later, then thanks for coming. When I was asked to speak, I was asked to talk about uh, our own or my own experience of e-learning, in particular, clinical training and homeopathy. And I can't do that without Denise because my experience in the last decade is entwined with her. Unfortunately, she's had a really bad night and has been a little ill. And so she's not going to join us today. And I'm going to fill in some of the gaps that she was going to provide. So apologies for that. When I mentioned to Claudia what I was going to speak about, it was really about this, overcoming some of the challenges and tensions and risks actually in homeopathy education, and deliberately talk about some experiences rather than theory. I don't want to bog you down with theory, especially on a Saturday afternoon, but we can't separate the two. And so I do want to talk to you about the times in which we live and our experiences as we have been working through those times. And so in the next, say, 70 minutes, I'm going to talk about the creation of our school and the creation of our research office that is thriving, that is committed to excellence. I'm going to talk to you about what you can do in your country, about what you cannot change, but above all, what you can change. And I think, to our great fortune, Denise and I have been able to, through our experiences of teaching homeopathy, we've been teaching homeopathy for 60 years combined, and practicing homeopathy for about 70. And so, if you put the numbers together, so we've got some experiences. But what I want to tell you today and share with you is that for your success, for the success of homeopathy broadly, to move homeopathy into the 21st century more deeply, we have to be clear about what we cannot change and what we can change, and then get to work. I'm looking at Vera. Vera, you're okay? There you go. All right, she's all right. Now, also a sobering story as well, because I've spoken at Liga a number of times. I've been invited to speak. I remember speaking at a Liga conference in Delhi in, I think, 2010. Now, that's 15 years ago. In that speech to thousands of doctors and homeopaths, I pointed to a number of challenges that we had in the next 5 years. And none of those, I'm going to say none of those experiences or none of those points that I made, I saw being integrated into the activities at Liga over the subsequent 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years. And so there's a sobering story here as well, that for me, I feel that to an extent, time has been lost. And I feel an urgency about getting a message across to you all about the direction, the unequivocal direction that education is going, that we cannot change or we cannot control. And then the parts of this that we can control with some serious conversations and a meaningful strategic plan. So there you go. That's what we're going to be speaking about. I like this t-shirt. I believe that homeopathy has 238 problems and education can solve a lot of them and research can solve the rest. So that's what I do. That's who I am. I'm a bit of a geek. a bit of a nerd. I like my old textbooks. I love history. I love education, and I love research. I've been doing homeopathy for many, many years. I don't know how to do anything else. I tried actually, and I was not successful at my at my exit or perceived or possible exit from homeopathy. It never worked. Now, in some parts of the world, disclosures are important. So I want to describe to you who I am, just briefly, so that you can understand some context for what I'm saying. And can we mute? Yeah, we got to mute that lady. All right. Now, as you can see in front of you, I work at the Academy of Homeopathy Education. That's an educational institution, and we provide homeopathy to professional homeopaths, so non-medical homeopaths, naturopathic homeopaths, and medically qualified potential homeopaths. When I say naturopathic homeopaths, I mean naturopaths that want to study deeper and further. Around 25% of our students are medically oriented, and we're really, really proud to have a relationship with the American Institute of Homeopathy. The American Institute of Homeopathy from 1844 has been responsible for the advocacy for the educational standards and for the quality in the profession in North America when it comes to medically available or medically licensed practitioners that want to practice homeopathy. So we have a relationship here, but it's important that you hear that we don't only deal with medical students. Now, that's different perhaps to the experience you have in your country. A lot of you are here in Europe, and I've heard already today with a conversation with Claudia about some difficulties and challenges with access to education in universities, for example. But for 10 years, I worked in a university in Australia, and I ran the homeopathy department. And after the homeopathy department, I ran the biomedical department. And after that, I was responsible for the e-learning department across the entire institution, which had about 5,500 students. So in that experience, that was in my own journey. It was in the decade preceding, say, 2015. So 2005 to 2015, I was practicing homeopathy, but involved in higher education in the Australian system in Sydney, in Australia. Now, I also am fascinated, no, passionate. I'm desperately passionate about quality research in homeopathy. And Denise began a charity in North America. Bernardo, what are they called? 50C13s, 503s1Cs, whatever those things are. Yeah. And
501c3.
that's it. And so we run a research office, but we also provide a low cost, high quality telehealth service for clinical care as well. And these two, home research and the clinical facility, are very, very closely related. We're really fortunate also, just by way of further context, to have a lovely working relationship that is based on our research office with the Faculty of Homeopathy in the UK. So this is my orientation. I've been in practice for 37 years. I've been teaching for, it's actually about 28, but whatever the number is, 28 years. I've been involved in education, and education is different to teaching homeopathy, but I've been involved in education for a long time and involved in e-learning, as you can see, for 15 years. Clinically, I've not seen a client face to face since 2010. I want you to just sit with that. I wonder what you think about that. I see a number of clients every week, and I've not seen a person face to face in the last 15 years. That's around 10,000 consultations. You can see that my life is in front of the computer. I teach online 300 to 400 lectures every year. I teach clinic online every day. all year. And as Claudia mentioned, that yeah, I turned my interest and my passion into a PhD. And at the heart of it, it's looking at integrative medicine, complementary medicine, traditional medicine, homeopathic medicine, education, and learning technologies. And here we are. We're looking at each other online. I've just met Ekaterina. There she is. She's in a foreign country. I've just met Claudia. She's in Austria. Vera's in Russia. And we can do this together thanks to learning technologies. Now, what I want you to do is go to the chat box. You can see the chat box at the bottom of your screen, and just type into the chat box if you can, where you are and how many years ago you completed your medical training. Now, I'm assuming most of you are medically oriented, but I'd like to know how many years ago you qualified with your practice, with your license to practice. All right, that is going to be important information. Where are you? And when did you qualify? All right. I also teach at a few other places, National Center for Integrative Medicine here, and the College of Natural Health and Homeopathy. All right, let's move on. Now, who's in the house? I think who's in the house are mainly physicians and other licensed healthcare providers. Yep, here we go. Good. Vienna, 21 years ago. Claudia, thank you. Giulietta is from Argentina, and she was studying, finishing medicine in the Clinton administration. Russia in 2000. That's 25 years ago. Thanks for asking, Katerina. Slovenia, 28 years ago. Come on, Bernardo. I'm waiting for you. Come on, folks. Tell us where you are and when you qualified. I think that I'm talking to people that are passionate about advocacy for homeopathy. You are leaders in homeopathy. And if you're leaders in homeopathy, you must be interested in the future of education. While you're doing that, I also want to ask you about what your last 5 years has been like. What's your clinical and educational experience in the last 5 years? What is your clinical experience? How's it changed in the last 5 years? Yep. If you're studying or if you're teaching, how's that changed in the last 5 years? Here we go. Bernardo, 1980. Well, you could technically say that that was the Carter administration. And anyway, it's 44. Is it 44 years ago? Yeah, it is. 44 years. And Bernardo lives around the corner from me. Russia, this is Kozlov Medical University, 2009. Now, this is all very important, folks, because I'm going to butcher the names, but you can see Russia, 1999. And why is that important? It's critically important because when you qualified in medicine, medicine is no longer taught the way you learned. Education is no longer done the way that you learned. Russia, 2009. And I missed one. Yeah, London Faculty of Homeopathy as well. Yeah, so the what I'm trying to point out to you, great. And Bernardo, all right, so 70% telehealth since the epidemic. Now, why I'm mentioning this is because this thing that we all experienced, the epidemic, it's not the first epidemic that's ever hit the planet. There have been other large and small epidemics that have taken up our time and attention. But this is the first epidemic of the digital age. This is the first epidemic that's happened on our watch in a different age. What do I mean by that? Because, my friends, even without the epidemic, there was already a revolution taking place in healthcare. And even without COVID-19, there was already an epidemic taking place in education broadly around the world. Now, I use this term deliberately And some people call it the information age or the digital age. But folks, we're in it. Yep. You've lived through it. You've lived through the transition from the industrial age to the digital age. And why is this important? The person that knows most about changes of eras is this guy here, Kuhn, Kuhn. Brilliant man. And a revolution, the digital revolution, or any revolution, as you probably know, is a violent, there's always violence, dramatic and irrevocable sweeping away of the old ways, the old institutions and the old regimes. You know what I mean? It's already happened. And it started around, I'm going to say, soon after Bernardo graduated. In the mid 80s and the 90s, we first started to see the early personal computers. By that time, things had already begun. In exactly the same way that in 1750, the first stacks, the first mills, the first um, signs of industry started to be peppered across the German and the British and the North American landscape, the French landscape. Soon, within 10 years, the spires and the cathedrals were no longer the tallest buildings. People had an opinion about it, just in exactly the same way that you have an opinion about the digital age and the iPhones and the ways in which we're engaging. You see, can we have it both ways? We've got the opportunity to learn from each other today, right now at 3:15 in Madrid and in Stockholm, right? And here I am in Philadelphia. It's fantastic, right? But we also have strong opinions about what we see happening in our culture, what we see happening to teenagers, what we see with the health consequences with our children. But from an education point of view, it's critical that you understand that you can't change this, and neither can I, but memory is no longer important. Instruction has given way to support. Control of content has given way to curation of content. Competition has given way in education to cooperation. The experts are no longer necessary, especially in an age that values co-creation, and learning skills have given way to life learning skills in education, whether we like it or not. Whether you hate it or love it, it doesn't matter because it's happened. Now, we know this because if you're involved if you're involved in healthcare and delivering healthcare, if you're a physician or a homeopath, or you're a physiotherapist, or if you're a radiologist, then you know that technologies are starting to, and in fact have dominated healthcare. Digital technologies, robotics, AI, nanotechnologies, health informatics, electronic health records, and wearable health-related technologies are dominating medicine. And you know what it's like, because every time that a client turns up in your office, they know more about the condition than you do, because they've spent the last 3 weeks Googling some dodgy website. And it's difficult. Our clients are becoming more complex because of their access to all of this information. I want you to think about it from another perspective, because your medical practices, your pharmacy practices, and even your physiotherapy practices and your and even your osteopathic practices are dominated by practice management software or clinical support software. And as we've just heard, telehealth. Now, this is in our field now. This is medicine, but also we're adjacent, or we're a part of, or integrated with medicine, and technologies are dominating our lives. It's brilliant and it's awful at the same time. Maybe a quick show of hands. Who loves living in the 21st century? Yeah. So there's some hesitancy, isn't it? I mean, wow, I can make my cup of tea in 2 minutes by using a technology. I can type a note on my computer, and I can meet Ludmilla and for the first time, and and a friendship has started. It's amazing, but also the consequences for healthcare. It's really important in India and Australia. It'll be really important in Russia. Telehealth has solved massive problems in those countries where the tyranny of distance is dominating the healthcare conversation. And of course, in amongst all of this, over the years, homeopathy have been early adopters of technologies. Did you know that Hahnemann, at one point in his life, did 2/3 of his practice by mail? Hahnemann prescribed distantly after a letter. 2/3 of his practice. When I think about the 21st century or the 20th century, when I graduated, software programs were being used in this complementary therapy.
Я не буду.
No, 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 no,
Ты
no,
не
no.
поняла,
Mute,
что?
mute, 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 mute. Okay, she's muted. Software programs landed in homeopathy long before naturopathy, long before nutritional medicine, long before acupuncture. Point location software is recent in acupuncture, but homeopathy have been using software programs, digital technologies. We are early adopters of technologies in homeopathy. We use I remember fondly my first computer, my Dell 386. What a beautiful thing it was. But of course, we've just heard that so many of us are now prescribing via telehealth. But when it comes to education, what I'm essentially saying to you is that we have to navigate the digital age. And I want you to start thinking about how is it possible to maintain impeccable education standards, impeccable clinical training standards, measure educational success, as well as deal with everything from crazy new ways of cheating. Students are really smart, and support students and learners in their journey. I want you to read that last paragraph and just in your own head, or maybe even towards the end of our conversation, let's talk about how is it possible to maintain education standards. The measurement of educational success is how an institution, a university or an academy, is measured, right? How do we measure? We measure usually with retention statistics. We measure the health of an institution through completion rates. And so if you know about that kind of stuff, and if you're involved in education, then how on earth do you start to do that in an online environment? Well, maybe the past can help. What do you think? Let's go back in time and see if there's anything that we can learn from where homeopathy's been in the last 230 years. I like history. I'm going to take you on a quick 10-minute historical journey. And let's start with Herring in 1833. Now, but the question is important. Can the past teach us anything about how to manage today? In a way, I think it can. But let's go on the journey together. What we see here is that Constantine Herring, extremely good-looking man, my wife calls him her homeopathic boyfriend. Constantine Herring arrives in Philadelphia in 1833, just down the road. And within 2 years, he has established the first school along with Williamson and Jean. And there was some muscle in that school. There was money raised to teach homeopathy, and there was an investor. What happened? Anyone know what happened to that school? It folded within a few years because of the 1837 financial crash, The investor needed the money back, and there's not many schools that survive only on student tuition. And because the school was funded privately, it folded, closed in 1842. Vesselhoft had enough. He moved to Boston. The school was finished. The Allentown Academy, that's the first educational experience in homeopathy. Actually, when you think about it, maybe it wasn't, because possibly we don't really know how Hahnemann taught his inner circle of early disciples. You know, in what way, or how did Stapf learn homeopathy? In what way or how did Berningshausen learn his homeopathy in such an amazingly quick amount of time in the early days? Friedrich Hahnemann, how did he learn his homeopathy? It sounds like, to me, it was very likely to have been an apprentice conversational situation, a very informal educational situation at the beginning. Has anyone ever seen this document here? This document is a list of those that received a diploma from the faculty of I don't know what that last word is, but this is the list of people that got diplomas from
Academy.
the Allentown. Oh, it is too. Thank you so much. From the Allentown Academy. Can you read it? Herring gave himself a diploma. Vesselhoft wrote himself a diploma. I can't read these next two names. Butte wrote himself a diploma. Lippy wrote himself a diploma. Now, as we go down, we see, what is this? Samuel Hahnemann in Paris received a diploma. Down here, other names: Schweikert, Berningshausen, Quinn. I never know if Quinn has one N or two N's. Does anyone know? I can't tell if that's one N or two N's. Vesselhoft, two. All right, thank you. And you get the point that I'm trying to make, is that what's going on? Hang on. Just because there's an academy, do they just start writing diplomas to people that live in other countries? That's not good educational practice. We know that Hahnemann wrote to Herring and said, can you please write my wife a diploma? Now, I'm not so sure that that's to be celebrated. It's one of the murkier sides of the early days of education and homeopathy. Anyway, we move on. The Allentown Academy didn't do so well. We know about Herring
Давай
and
твой
the...
телефон на аудио.
No, Ludmilla, you need to mute. Hang on. There we go. All right. We know that Herring was involved in another educational institution, the Homeopathic Medical College, Pennsylvania. And we also know that he started to fight with Lippi. And if you know about the early days of American homeopathy, you'll know that these two giants started to fight. They loved each other. I have a suspicion, actually, that Lippi's firstborn son was named after Constantine Herring. But things took a turn for the worse. They started to fight, and eventually they could no longer stand each other. And the fight was about whether or not we should have medical science taught in a homeopathy school. Whether medical science should be taught in serious institutions. Of course, from the Lippi side, he's thinking about things from the perspective of pure homeopathy. I'm interested in the externalization of the internal imbalance, and therefore I don't need to know about the anatomy and physiology in the depth to which you're asking me. Whereas from Herring's point of view, as a scientist, as a man with a very expensive microscope, he was arguing a different perspective. We are going to be humiliated in the field of medicine unless we keep up with an understanding of science and anatomy, physiology, pathophysiology, and pharmacology. Anyway, the point is that the fight meant that there were two schools, and then eventually one thing led to another, and the two schools merged into the Hahnemann Medical College of Philadelphia in, I think it was 1869 that that institution came about. But again, institutions arriving, homeopathy education struggling in the early days. What did it look like? Well, that's what it looked like. It looked like a bunch of blokes. That's an Australian expression, Vera. A bunch of men. It looks very chummy. There's a nice moment down here, but I see educational instruction of the day. Another photo from the Times, medical education for early homeopaths. There were lovely invitations. Look at this. The lecture, this is by Bentley Matthews, admits whoever this person is, to the lecture on therapeutics, materia medica and therapeutics. In addition to that, in other years, we saw the Hahnemannian Medical College of Homeopathy. Here it is. And look, it's Lippy's cholera lecture in 1865, and that's your admission ticket. In the early days, of course, things were formalized with the AIH, 1844. And in North America, the AIH was responsible for maintenance and standards of educational practice. It's very important that it just didn't relate to clinical practice, but also how homeopaths were trained. And in this part of the world, anyway, we see 22 homeopathic medical schools established, producing around 15,000 practitioners in the 60 years after the death of Hahnemann. Another historical perspective is important to us because we see something dramatic and important happening with the Kent Postgraduate School in 1890. The postgraduate school, all of Kent's philosophy lectures and his materia medica lectures were transcribed by students sitting in his lectures during the 10-year period that that school was running from 1890 through to 1900. But here's the thing. There were only 30 graduates from a school that ran for 10 years. What's going on? And in fact, the closure of the school and the reason that Kent moved to Chicago was because of complaints about trying to indoctrinate students with Swedenborgian Christianity when the students were there to learn homeopathy. Now, the whole thing was funded by a very important Swedenborgian benefactor, Pitcairn, and he funded the school for the 10 years that it was running. It was based around a clinical facility that was very, very busy and important in the city of Philadelphia. But again, the story of its closure and the controversies around it are so messy. If we come into the 20th century, you'll see that in North America in particular, there was only, by 1940s, only one college really remaining, the Hahnemann Medical College. And even then in 1945, it was put on probation. And it was only lifted when it decided to stop teaching homeopathy, when it divested itself of its homeopathy training. And the name was dropped in 1997. And Bernardo and myself noticed with some sadness that during the pandemic, the actual Hahnemann Hospital that was dominated the skyline of Philadelphia, it was amazing to drive through the city of Philadelphia and look up, and there in neon lights was Hahnemann in the Hahnemann Hospital. The actual institution closed during the pandemic. Now, it was at this point, or one of these points, that I was going to hand over to Denise, and I wanted her to speak to you about her primary research into the decline of homeopathy in the 1900s. But as I mentioned, she is not feeling so well. This is her in Transylvania, in Sibiu, where Hahnemann lived for 2 years in 1777. And she's looking at Hahnemann's handwriting and tracking every book that he removed from the library. In other words, everything he read when he was looking after von Bruckenthal's um, library and coin collection. Um, Now, the reason that I wanted her to mention it is because the part of the decline of homeopathy in education standards that's often mentioned in conversation and in the textbooks is that homeopathy education really suffered because of the Flexner Report. And for those of you that know in North America, the Flexner Report, Abraham Flexner was given the task of renewing and revitalizing medical education in North America. And it's that report and the subsequent reaction to the report that is often ascribed as the reason that homeopathy education declined. Denise has got a very different idea, and I think she's completely correct. I would say that it's very likely that it has nothing to do with the Flexner report, which was published in 1910. The decline of American homeopathy started in the 1860s, and the decline in American homeopathy is due to a lack of orientation internally of what homeopathy is and was, a lack of definition of what homeopathy is and was, and an openness to deal, an openness of and a willingness to accept poor practice, poor homeopathic practice by people using remedies without the philosophy. And the story of the decline of American homeopathy is a decline in standards and identity, not because some nasty financial person came along and wrote a report 50 years after. Carol Dunham, the great New York homeopath, died in, what was it, 1879 because of his desperate attempts to hold the profession together. And the profession was splitting itself apart because of this leniency and a lack of identity of fundamental principles, fundamental Hahnemannian principles. When it comes to the revival of homeopathy in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, what we see, especially in relationship to education in this part of the world, we started to see homeopathy returning, interestingly, on the back of counterculture, on the back of how do I say it? A bunch of hippies having a fantastic medically oriented or naturopathically oriented folks that were looking for alternatives in the 1970s, and the NCH Summer School was a part of that. No curriculum, no paid positions, just passionate homeopaths wanting to share their experiences. And we also saw the formal rise of the naturopathic colleges that taught significantly and significant amounts of homeopathy, say at the National College of Naturopathic Medicine, as it was then, Bastyr University, and the Southwest Naturopathic College, as it was known then, Sonoma now. So what am I trying to say to you? What I'm saying is that the story of education, which has not really been written yet, and if I get a summer to myself, then I'll write it. But the story of education and homeopathy in the West, and forgive me to exclude India in this conversation, because Indian medical education and homeopathic education is completely separate. It's been about money. It's been about private equity, school closures, and desperately disappointed students. It's been about very uneven quality. It's been about education standards that have been poorly applied and poorly understood, and a disagreement within the professions about what are the fundamental standards of training a homeopath. What are the competencies of being a homeopath? The story of education has been around passionate practitioners that want to teach, but not educators. Now, sometimes that's a controversial statement in homeopathic circles, but I want to make it, and I think I'm starting to get to that age that I don't care if people don't like what I say anymore. But anyway, what I'm saying to you is that people have very often been involved in education that are not educators. Now, I'm not an educator myself, although more recently I've got my doctorate in that field, but I didn't start as an educator, but I've learned so much from listening to the educators as to how to do it well. And there has been a lack of clarity in the basic, the fundamental, the original and clear necessity to determine what is required to be a safe homeopath. We don't have that understanding broadly and universally across our profession. And above all, we don't have any research. And like I told you, I'm an educator and a researcher. And where there is no research, I've stopped listening to the opinion. There are plenty of opinions. There's too many opinions. Everyone has an opinion. Everyone's an expert. And so we get to the situation today where, as we've heard from you in the chat box, that we've got a bewildering, a crazy array of educational provision in our profession. There's no other profession on the planet like homeopathy. Why? Because you can get a master's degree in homeopathy in Durban, but you can get a level 5 diploma of homeopathy in New Zealand. Or you can get a master's level education in the United States, or you can get a naturopathic qualification that includes some homeopathy, but it might only be 50 or 80 hours. And we have this ridiculous situation where the basic fundamentals of structure, guardrails, and strategy are still missing in what we do and what we love, right? In the West, when it comes to medical homeopaths, we've got a situation where, unlike India, where homeopathy and materia medica and therapeutics and case management is wrapped up in my medical education, and it's integrated into that. All of the medical sciences is taught in that qualification. But in the West, so often it's I have my medical degree, and now I'm going to learn homeopathy by going to some webinars and clipping on some additional information, often without a curriculum. This array of provision is unparalleled in any other profession. Unparalleled. It's crazy. So let's get to the personal story. And you know, I say that I'm going to tell you the origin story of the Academy of Homeopathy Education, and I'm not doing it to blow any trumpets or to tell you how wonderful we are. I'm also touching wood because we have had significant challenges in the establishment of this institution. But everything that I've told you is really critical in understanding what we've done and how we've gone about it. So the origin story, the beginning of the Academy of Homeopathy Education is actually with a British school, an English school. And that school is the Center for Homeopathic Education, CHE, which opened a New York branch. One thing led to another over a couple of years, and the accreditation body in North America refused to accredit it because it didn't meet the education standards. So that's really important that you hear that there is in professional homeopathy, so the training of professional homeopaths, there is an accreditation body that does the job of accrediting schools, and it does it pretty adequately and sometimes very well. And it had an opinion about CHE. At the time, they didn't want to put any more money into it, and so the business, the whole institution was either going to fold or it was given to Denise with its debt. And why I say that to you, and I say that transparently to you, is because Denise, to continue this educational institution, assumed personal debt. That's why I get really angry when she's not acknowledged as being the person that has really, really kept this alive and been accountable and responsible for it. So she assumed a whole lot of debt. And around that time, we met, and I moved to North America. That's the love story. That doesn't matter for our lecture for today. But we got going, and we started the reincarnation. We had a Brexit with the CHE school. We rebranded it, the Academy of Homeopathy Education, and we got underway. Now, immediately we dealt with some challenges. We did a whole lot of activities really well. When I say that, we had to dance and we had to be light. The reason I'm saying that to you is because we realized we made a decision that was not a smart decision in the early days. And it's the problem that many, many other homeopathy schools have about bricks and mortar, about a place. Now, when you are renting commercial space, very often you've got to commit for a year or 2 years. You're signing a lease for 5 years. That's a huge amount of money. Now, what we did when we realized that we didn't want to commit for 5 years, especially to the dead time, the dead space that happens in homeopathy education. You know, if you were running a weekend school, then why on earth would you rent a commercial space that's not being used during the week? What we did is we got involved with WeWork. Does anyone remember WeWork? That extraordinary initiative that took commercial real estate around the world by storm, maybe 10 years ago. So we rented our space from WeWork. We ran the school out of that. And it was brilliant because we could rent the space at exactly the times that we needed it. But then we couldn't afford it. We actually realized dramatically one day, hang on, this is really expensive. And yes, there was lots of free beer, but homeopathic students don't really, want to come to homeopathy school because of the beer. So we changed. We went to a different uh, uh, space that was less expensive. And then in 2016, we had a conversation and we decided to offer our classes online. And we noticed something that happened immediately. This is years before the pandemic. What happened was that the students that were based in New York City didn't want to come anymore. They wanted to stay at home and consume our education 4 subway stops away from home. Now, we didn't prescribe that. We didn't expect that. We did that because we had folks that were driving down from Boston. We had folks that were flying in from South Carolina. We had folks that were coming from Colorado, right? They would fly in. Many homeopathy schools do that model: fly in, fly out. One weekend a month. That's what we did. That's what everyone used to do. And we realized it's not what we wanted to do, and it wasn't working. So we stopped it. We offered an online option, and everybody took it except for one student. One student refused to study online, and so she would bring her books with her and come and sit with us when we were teaching. Our school transformed very, very quickly from a bricks and mortar school to a online school. And one of the other things I think that I just mentioned to you is that we poured a huge amount of thought and agony into the clinical training model. But I'm going to talk more about clinical training in a little while. We still had to do all of the things that had to happen. We were running an online school, but we were timetabling using little pieces of paper and sticking them on a whiteboard. But we had to re-examine the ways in which we'd inherited all of this education. Now, the thing about Denise and myself is that since 1995, I was living in the Southern Hemisphere and flying to New Zealand or flying to Ireland or flying to Belgium or flying to San Francisco, flying all around the world. I did thousands and thousands and thousands of miles to teach homeopathy to anyone that wanted me to talk about homeopathy. And I didn't know it at the time, but Denise was doing the same thing. She was living in New York and she was flying all around the world. She would fly to London, she'd fly to all sorts of different places, LA, to teach homeopathy. And so we realized that, when you've taught for 15 other schools or 20 other schools, you start to learn about what the gaps are and what the problems are. Now, that job in and of itself is delightful because you fly in, you teach a great class, and you leave. Everyone loves you because you're not marking the papers and you're not dealing with the student meltdowns and you're not dealing with problems and finances and all the rest of it. It's a delightful job. I highly recommend it. I've seen the world. Wow. I don't know that there's a corner of the world I haven't been to thanks to homeopathy. I've been in every country in Asia teaching homeopathy. But when it became our problem or our challenge, we started from the foundations and we transformed the curriculum because we knew we had one opportunity to get it right. And we started with acute prescribing. We knew that the thing that was critical and that I've got to say, even 10 years ago and 15 years ago, was a giant gaping hole in homeopathy was competent and confident acute prescribing, right? And in a live clinic. Students, my first lecture at homeopathy school was sulfur. That was the first lecture. That's ridiculous, right? Now, I went to a lovely school. I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but it was a ridiculous first lecture. Such a critical remedy for someone that doesn't know how to study and has no idea what I'm doing and is trying to find my feet. So we redesigned our curriculum: acute prescribing, chronic prescribing, foundations, 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 integration, application. Foundations, integration, application. Clinical training the whole way through. Observation, 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 becoming involved, becoming involved, becoming involved, case management, case management, case management, case management, responsible, confident, out the door. Like a clinical training model, straight from a medical school or a university. And that's the other thing we did. We made it so that it could be, and it is designed, semester 1, semester 2, semester 3, semester 4. And it is a university model, university subjects, Materia Medica 1, therapeutics 201, clinical training 301, whatever. All right. Now, in addition to that, we realized that there was another challenge, and I knew from working in the university about educational pathways. It's something which is still very poorly understood, and it is the solution to all the problems that people have in our homeopathic educational world. When you understand a way to capture previous learning and previous experience, acknowledge it, and then place the person in an advanced situation appropriately in a curriculum. Having an advanced pathway and knowing how to do that was really important. And then we realized something else, and you're going to hate it. You're going to hate this one, my friends, and that is we no longer used lecturers with big egos. I'll say it again. We stopped using teachers with giant egos. We realized something unfortunate. What we realized, and what we realized over 20 years of teaching homeopathy before this, is that students, when they're developing their understanding of homeopathy, need consistency. They need to hear it again and again and again and again. They need to see it done the same way each time, just the same way that you make the perfect omelette or the perfect cookies or the perfect, where I come from, biscuits, right? You make the perfect biscuits because you watched your mum and then you read the recipe and then you did it again and again and again. And from confidence, from repetition comes competence and then confidence. That is an educational non-negotiable. And so we only hired clinical teachers that we knew were going to be able to be consistent, not ego-driven, and not show their fancy advanced moves to a bunch of new students. Now, again, if that lands and that's unpopular, I really apologize for it. But I can tell you that by doing that, what we have are confident graduates that can then, from a foundational knowledge, go and study with whoever the next big thing is, right? Go and learn how to do this or that, or use this advanced method, or blah, blah, blah. But no, not an undergraduate homeopathy education. Foundations, 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 every day, application, application, out the door. It's a very simple model. We realized who our students are, and these are our students. Our students are extraordinary, mainly female physicians, medical students. 25%, I think I mentioned 25% of our students are medically licensed or in the training of, or sometimes doing a medical training. We realized after a lot of focus groups and a lot of conversations what the needs of our students were, our learners were, that online, non-negotiable, but also I've got to deal with the little ones as well. And so this is not what you saw in medical school back in 1999, is it? I'm just going to the chat box for the moment. Yeah, Thailand. Yeah, see, Wanlop is in Thailand and has been a physician since 1983. Well, there were no children in the classroom, were there? Gilletta, were there any? Julietta,
Never
were there?
at
Yeah,
all.
exactly. Well,
Never.
yeah, exactly. And if you think about it, oh, hang on, is that appropriate? Well, we've done two things by saying yes. One is we've been able to move towards the students, and secondly is we've created a community. In our school, it's all about the kids, right? Let's say that I think if I'm right, I'll keep things confidential, but if I'm pretty sure that this student had a fourth child while studying with us and delivered a presentation on a small remedy. It was an assignment that she was scheduled to do 13 hours after the delivery of her fourth child. It's got to be a world record. But that wasn't awkward. It was celebrated. And it was a brilliant and a high quality piece of work as well. So what I've just said to you there is we've worked out, and of course things are changing all the time, so touch wood. We've worked out who is the demographic, who's the sample, who's coming. As well as that, we've been able to give people actually what they wanted. And we realized no one wants to waste their weekends. I mean, who wants to turn up at 3 o'clock Central European time on your day off after a busy week and learn homeopathy? I mean, are you crazy? Are you crazy? Now, you don't want to do that every month. You don't want to do that all the time. Thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it. Please, I really appreciate it. But do you understand? What we realized was that providing a different model and finding other points in the week, realizing that there are students that want to go fast and students that want to go slower, that we've got the opportunity to uh, move to the students. And then there's this part, right? And then there's this part. And I think the part that I now want to talk about just for 5 minutes relates relates back to what we were talking about at the beginning about the unequivocal and unchanging trajectory of education. The horse has bolted, my friends. And so by understanding the existing educational landscape, I felt we were able to move towards the trends in education rather than resist them. I would be saying to you now, after this lecture today, that, we've got to, as the prayer says, we've got to understand that which cannot be changed, that which can be changed, and know the difference between the two when we go about our important activities. For me, that's a really big fundamental issue. And so as Denise and I are having conversations about, okay, let's rewrite the curriculum. Well, we can, but we cannot rewrite or resist the revolutionary changes taking place in education. Now, the impact of the changes in education, I don't want to overemphasize it enough. Well, I do actually. I want to emphasize it appropriately to you that this is been critical for us, and I think is critical in creating some of the challenges that we face as a broad profession, medical, naturopathic, and professional homeopathy worldwide. I wrote a paper on it a long time ago, or at least it was published in 2019. And what I looked at was, is there any research into education in complementary therapies at all? Is there any research into education in homeopathy? No. No. Uh, in the peer-reviewed literature. And what I found was actually there was barely any research in the family of complementary therapies at all. And I suppose what I realized from that was when it comes to homeopathy, if there's no research, there's just opinion. And if there's just opinion, then everybody is flying blind. Because there's little research culture, actually, there's little research capacity in our field. And because we actually, I think, don't really care so much about research for probably legitimate reasons, we are relying on opinion. And so for big decisions, see, look, if you're, let's say, you're running or you're a vice president of Liga, or you're running a department in Liga, or you're responsible for the professional homeopaths in North America or South Africa. Imagine that that's you. Well, where you set the educational standard creates the next decade of people coming into the profession. But if you have no data, that creates a real challenge for you. It's often said that I wouldn't want to be involved in change in education. It's like herding cats, right? There are massive educational challenges. And in our field, the challenges are felt across the profession. I want to take you through what I think are the challenges that we cannot influence that are taking place at the moment. And if we can't influence them, then it's not about we just roll down or fall down or ignore them. We've got to roll with them. If the river's flowing, get in a canoe and roll with it, from my point of view. Now, for the changes and the threads and for the trajectory of education, we've got to look in different publications in different directions. These are a couple of examples. You can see there the 2014 NMC Technology Outlook, blah, 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 whatever. Publications. What do they say? Well, what they say is video is 82% of all internet traffic. Are you going to resist that? That just is. That's a reality. It was 60% in 2014. As of 2023, 53% of US students are enrolled online. Well, that's a reality. Yep. There's nothing we can do about that. That is what's going on. These publications say really interesting things, like um, in 1 year or less, if your institution is not allowing students to bring their own device, if you're not flipping the classroom, if you're not engaged in mobile learning and online learning, then you've missed the boat. If you have not, in 3 years' time, included games and gamification, learning analytics and open content, I missed one, microcredits. What the hell is that? You've missed the boat. And if in 5 years' time you've not engaged with the Internet of Things, machine learning, natural user interfaces, and wearable technologies, you're behind. Now, where did this come from? Oh, this came from the 2014 higher education edition of the NMC report. Now, that was 2014. That's 10 years, that's 11 years ago. What are they saying now? Wow. If you're not engaged at the cutting edge of education and you're missing the boat, then there are massive consequences for attracting students, for supporting those students, and for outcomes in the profession. The consequences are that for students, there's too much information. There's saturation of information. How are we going to deal with that as educators in the corner of homeopathy? Things have changed. Learner behavior changed. Attendance, the whole world of attendance has changed on a dime. Students are completely fixated with assessments. They never used to be. What happened to the student experience? Now all they're interested in is on what date is my assessment. There is a whole world of plagiarism going on. That is, and the use of artificial intelligence in the writing of homeopathy assignments. That is bewildering. Students have lower attention spans. They demand flexibility. They only want to hear relevant content. And if it's fun, that'll do. That'll be better for me. They want to bring their own devices. And the consequences across the board are transformations of campus and college culture. And if you are working in a university, and some of you here I know are, then you'll confirm that. College life, student life has transformed as a consequence of digital technologies and the pandemic, and transformed standards and competencies. The compliance of universities, the compliance around schools and school culture has massively changed. And at the end of the day, um, whoops. And at the end of the day, it's that one I want. Nope, that one, that one, that one. And at the end of the day, curriculum is transforming on our watch. What I'm saying to you is that you have to identify what you cannot influence and be okay with it. Be light on your feet, dance, flow down the river, whatever analogy you want, evolve, and take a big breath. And if you don't like some parts of it, take a big breath, but get in the river. Now, that's what Denise and I did to a huge extent by embracing the things that we cannot change. Other things we cannot change, let's not worry about these, but you get the point. 370 billion is the worth of the distance learning industry. Online learning can decrease the time that is needed to learn a subject by up to 60%. Isn't that interesting? If you think about some of the prejudices we have about homeopathy. Oh, homeopathy, you can't learn it in 7 years or 10 years. Wow. Um, the statistics we don't need, but you want for me, hopefully you understand the point. And so if we now focus on the clear trends, because I showed you the 2014 clear trends, the clear trends in 2020 were an adoption of mobile learning, data analytics, mixed reality, artificial intelligence, the use of blockchain and virtual assistants. Those are the educational trends in 2020. And again, my friends, it's 2025, right? Now, we're not talking about let's train 600,000 people how to do computer software programming. You know, that what you see in front of you would relate directly to that, but some of it relates to what we do. And by identifying what you cannot influence, then hopefully you can start to identify the things that you can influence. And here's what we can influence. Just checking the time. I'm doing all right. All right. Here's what we can influence. We can influence standards and competencies. I'll tell you a story. Back in 2013, I had the good fortune to be in Belgium, and I met the delightful Jean-Pierre Janssen and the equally delightful Professor Ashley Ross. And what they did was a very skilled navigation of a process whereby they took standards and competencies of homeopathic provings, and they engaged in a public comment period, a global public comment period. They dealt with big egos, they dealt with strong opinions, and what they came up with was the Unified Liga and ECH guidelines for provings. It was a tremendous example of exactly what has not happened in education for us. We need that. We don't necessarily need them, or folks or gents. If you're available, then put your hands up. But we need a process by which we can have clear global standards and competencies of what is it that creates a homeopath? What is it that is needed to identify, what is it that's needed to create a safe and effective and a confident and a competent homeopath? Now, in the US, we have those guidelines and to an extent. The Achina guidelines are the guidelines, the standards, and the competencies that I'm familiar with. India, of course, has these. We need them unified. There's a job for you, folks, some of you listening, right? What else can we influence? You can create a learning community. You do it by having fun. You do it by working hard. You do it by having events like this. Yep. If we follow this up and this initiative doesn't fall over, if the air can stay in the balloon, then we can create a community of passionate educators that gets stuff done. And we can also deal directly with the resistances that we can influence. How many times have you heard the words, if you're in education, oh, you can't create a community online? Or, oh, no, you can't create a healing presence online. You can't do online consultations. How do you do counseling skills online? How do you learn rapport online? How can you read a patient's body language online? How to read a patient's body movements through a computer? How do you learn diagnostic tools and things like that if you're a student in the field of homeopathy online? How do you gauge motivation of a client online? How do you blah, blah, blah? Folks, all of that, all of those statements, all of those, let's call them negative statements, but they're genuine statements of people that want to preserve standards. At the heart of it is this word. Do you know this word? Formation or formation of character, sometimes called professional formation. It's spoken about a lot in medical education. It's spoken about a lot in divinity education, or the education of ministers and priests. It's spoken a lot about in psychotherapy. It's the part of becoming a homeopath which is about developing the character of the homeopath. How do you teach that? How do you teach integrity, authenticity? How do you teach congruence? I can teach you how to take a case by reading Aphorism 83, right? You can teach stuff, but how do you form character? And so often, the resistances to online learning are actually about that, right? But above all, we need clarity on the knowledge and the skills and the attributes of a homeopath, right? That's the end result. For us, if we're teaching students, we need to be in alignment about we are doing this so that we create that, so that we have a student that has this set of knowledge, these skills, and those attributes. That's the end product. That's critical. And then, of course, we can also influence the standards, the hours, the credit hours, the model that we want to use, all of that stuff. We can fight about that. We can have arguments about those things that we can influence. But the resistances, we're going to have to push. And unfortunately, it does involve some of the old folks. Now, unfortunately, some of the resistances to learning technologies and online learning are from people that are people that studied medicine in 1998 or 1988 or 1963 or whenever it was. Now, I'm not saying that disrespectfully. I'm just saying that the faculty and often educational leaders are two generations behind the learners, and they cannot always be guiding the discussions about what is to be used and the way we're going to go about it. You see, in our classroom at AHE, we have an extraordinary classroom. We call them super mums. We've got folks that are coming from medical backgrounds. We've got folks that are coming from all sorts of backgrounds, like engineering, people that are wanting to change their whole work orientation in midlife. And so the diversity is also a conversation about the diversity and what we're going to offer them. What parchment are we going to offer them? Are we going to offer them an undergraduate qualification, like in New Zealand, a postgraduate qualification, like in South Africa? Is it going to be pitched at medical only or at naturopathic only, or the growth place at the moment, of course, is in the professional field of homeopathy. But we can do it. I believe it's firmly possible, even with those differences, those different groups, because we have clarity on the outcome. Because if we have clarity on the skills, knowledge, and attributes of the homeopath, then it doesn't matter if it's a medical student in a university or if it's a professional student in an academy. It doesn't matter. The usual criticism or the usual sticking point about the number of hours of medical science required by a homeopath in their training, it's a conversation that's just got to be had. It's got to be had, and it's got to be had again, and then an agreement can be arranged, can be arrived at. What's pretty clear to me, with a couple of slides to go, is that we have to go to them. We can no longer expect students of homeopathy to come to us when we are either in the deep past or unavailable to them. By moving towards the students, we have the capacity to attract more learners that are going to uh, be the right learners for us. For Denise and myself, we were crystal clear that clinical training is the key for all of this. And so, out of interest, if you're interested, in our school, clinical training starts on day 3, and students watch and watch and watch and watch. And they watch basically, if they're in our full-time program, for about a year. They watch and watch and watch, and then assume higher degrees of responsibility and become involved in more and more advanced activities as as their hands are held in supervision. We have an externship, we have an internship. Our students do, there's a minimum number of hours, and most students massively exceed the minimum number of hours because they see the value of it. It's fully online, and it is, touch wood, we've never not had a live client, either acute or chronic, depending on the actual clinic itself. That's been the glue for us, in amongst all of the other things that I've mentioned. The last thing that I'd say before maybe a couple of questions and then time to go is that we've only come to some of the conclusions we've come to and some of the decisions we've come to because both Denise and I have been at school recently. In 2015, I started my PhD. You know, doing a PhD when you're an old bloke like me, you know, was a little bit daunting, but by God, did I learn stuff from being a student again. And it's exactly the same. Denise, back in I think it might have been 2019, enrolled at Johns Hopkins University, and she qualified from their medical department with a master's in the history of medicine. She knows stuff. And so just remembering, if you're involved in education, then be fully involved in education because it might teach you a couple of things as well. And then lastly, um, I've mentioned, you know, for me, the need to come together as a broad global community with the East and the West and the new and the old and the North and the South and everybody at the table to hammer out the qualities, skills, and attributes of the homeopath. If we start from there, the rest is easy, or the rest is easier. And I think that for all of the divergence and all of the difference that we have and all of the bewildering array of educational offerings, there's enough that's similar that will keep us together than any of the differences that we might be able to fight about. But to my mind, you know, that critical part, it's at the bottom of the slide, but it's the most important part, that integrated pre-medical training, pharmacology, physical examination, anatomy, physiology, and pathophysiology. Discussing that is probably going to be the hardest part, but let's have that conversation and see where it takes us. Hopefully, I don't have to come back in 15 years and talk to you again.
Well, Alistair, that was a very, very big overview on history and how you managed. And but honestly, I want to ask you one thing because you said it's the e-learning, especially that you want to talk about. And is there anything that you can give us and say what is especially for the e-learning important too?
Well, there's no difference between e-learning and learning now. The difference between the two is long gone. There's no meaningful difference anymore. Most programs in universities are blended. And so the reason I probably didn't emphasize and use the term e-learning is because it doesn't really make that much sense from my point of view. But the conversation has got to be what's the model that we choose that's best for our students. Now, here's what I know about medical students of homeopathy in the West. So again, forgive me for not really integrating the conversation about India here because that's that's specific and nuanced. But the perfect curriculum that medically licensed and working students want is different to the curriculum that professional homeopathic students want. It's really interesting. With a medical training, with a previous medical training, there is less time and less patience for the steps of education that I've mentioned. And so they typically want something that's smaller and narrower and assume that because of their previous medical knowledge, that they don't need to do this and this and this and this, right? Now, if that's the case, and therefore the needs and desires of the user, the student, the learner are different, then we have to go to them. We can't expect medical students to come to a product that's not the right shape. Now, I'm talking about an educational curriculum being a product. It is. Education is a product and distribution industry. That's all it is. And we have to make sure that the shape of what we offer is the shape that's needed, right? If there's a change in the market and there's a desire for a car that is that size and with a battery in it and that doesn't rely on any fossil fuels, then the first person to build it is going to make the most money out of it, right? That's what I mean by the shape is important. So, Claudia, I think the answer to your question is it's always going to involve online. Frankly, that horse is bolted, the horse is gone, the barn door is shut, whatever the analogy is. And so, I'm just assuming that you choose your learning management system, you choose your conference communication system, you hold hands as you get new learners comfortable with those different technologies. You provide lots of technological support and student support, and off you go.
Okay, and for the technological support and for the how you do it, do you have any hints on that for us?
Yeah, sure. You need a tech support person.
Okay.
You need a tech support person that has a sense of humor and a lot of patience. God bless them, we've found one. We have a tech person that everybody universally loves. Bernardo, what were you going to say?
Thank you, sir. It's so fascinating, and we could spend another 2 or 3 hours just talking about just what you presented.
I know.
But what I gather is that you really are saying the paradigm has shifted, and we need to catch up with the paradigm shift, and with education in particular. But then comes the main issue, which is that from the political standpoint, and this happened back in the 1900s when the Flexion report came, definitely people started to, oh my God, hold on, something changed here. And so people stopped attending homeopathic universities because it was no longer popular. It was now discredited. So, and we are in that situation where the world sees homeopathy as being bogus. And so that we need to then see how we can then inform people that no, this is legitimate. We have something to teach here.
Exactly. And see, that's a half glass empty, half glass full conversation. Because, yeah, there are critiques of, loud critiques of homeopathy, but have you seen the numbers, the consumer numbers, the over-the-counter sales? Like, no one gives a shit. Excuse me, I'm a New Zealander. I'm allowed to swear. So it's a part of my culture. And so for all of the the lazy critiques of homeopathy and even the legitimate critiques of homeopathy, it's not stopping interest. We're not harnessing the interest. And so, Bernardo, I think you're totally right about exactly what you said. But again, I'm not sure. See, the Flexner report, I think, is a bit shrouded in mists because if you were, let's say, back in the day, if you were 20 years old, and dad says, look, son, I've got 3 years worth of money for your college education, and the Flexner report has just been published, and you're looking at the list of schools, and the schools are listed, and there's a line, then are you going to go to the schools below the line? Of course you're not. You're going to go to the school above the line. And so I think, to an extent, I just think that the Flexner report was an imposition, and we can argue about the financial aspect of it or not, but an imposition of an attempt at standards and competencies through a lens. And many of the homeopathy schools just fell below the line, but many didn't. Some still remained above the line. But I just think that if you're looking at, Dad, where am I going to go for school? I'm going to go to Penn. I'm going to go to a school that's towards the top of the list, or and I think there's a part of that as well. But folks, I don't get the pessimism. I've been in this, and I've seen it. Like, I'm with you. I lived in Australia when the headline in the Sydney Morning Herald was "Homeopathy Kills Child." Right? Our practices in that instance, that was 2005, and in that instance, all of our practices started to become less busy. That one day, I know what it's like. But for all of that, I just don't see the depression. I don't see the decline. Look at the young folks that are here. I mean, Bernardo, look how amazing. I thought today that I said to Claudia, I thought I was going to be talking to people with silver hair only. And it's such a delight to not be speaking to folks with silver hair or no hair, right? I'm jealous of your hair, Bernardo. But so I see nothing but optimism. I see the numbers coming through. Our admissions office, the phone is ringing every day. And some of those people are not right for homeopathy. Some of them want nutrition, and some of them want acupuncture, and some of them want naturopathy. Some of them are not right for us. But there is so much interest in what we do. So much.
You brought a very important point, which is the issue of character and principles. And when you're teaching medical trained people, but also mothers that just want to learn about homeopathy for their children, and how to then teach the different curriculum based on that, and how are they trained to know what their limit is? That someone that needs tertiary care should not necessarily be treated by someone who is just treating acutes in homeopathy.
So that's a brilliant point. But I'd make another point as well, is that some of our super mums that are actually learning and doing the full curriculum are amazing homeopaths. Oh my God, amazing. And so let it not be said that a full medical training is a prerequisite for homeopathy. Let's just talk about Berninghausen as an example of a lawyer who was a pretty good homeopath.
And Bifilcus.
Oh, Bethilkius, good point. I'm not too bad. I'm not the world's best homeopath, but I'm not a doctor, And so I think there's got to be a room in the conversation for that reality. But Bernardo, that's the critical point. Where are the guardrails? Well, the guardrails are, if you have an education that's pitched for domestic bumps and bruises, then that's your guardrails, and that's it. Right? If your education is to understand acute and chronic prescribing, and you choose to stay within the acute lane, then that's it. But it's got to be enforced. There's got to be teeth. Professional associations have got to use the stick when people stray out of that. And if you understand the full array of chronic prescribing and the breadth and the depth of it, then there's much broader guardrails. So the educational conversation is really around that as well, and how in each individual country could that be done. The last thing we want to get into, I suppose, is a conversation about policing the practice of homeopathy to see that people stay within their lanes. But there's got to be a conversation about it. There's got to be a legitimate conversation around it from my point of view.
Thank you, Alistair.
Yeah, no problem. Um,
I could go for another couple of hours, but that's okay.
well,
But
let's
I'm
get
sure there are people that have other questions.
let's get together and
See, there is.
have a beer.
I was just looking, but are there any questions,
Dora
people?
says yes. Thanks, Alistair. Yep. Most difficult dialogue still to begin, but let's begin. Come on.
It's
Time's
not
of the essence. Time's ticking. Let's get into it.
difficult dialogue.
And anybody else?
One comment, and if there are no other questions, while there are questions coming, the LMHI and the ECH has gotten together, and we have the standards for homeopathic education, the benchmarks, which have been submitted to the World Health Organization. But due to political situations, it hasn't been really accepted, even though the World Health Organization has accepted benchmarks for every other integrative medicine approach, including anthroposophical medicine, which is really interesting. So they've been holding back on homeopathy since the times of Peter Fisher. So there's something going on, but we do have educational benchmarks, part of the LMHI and the ECH.
Yeah.
And I think Dora has been part of that. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's critical. Yeah, Dora,
Bernardo,
use me.
Bernardo, excuse me, but we don't have benchmarks. We have our LMHI ECH standard, and we are about maybe to make the benchmarks. And
Well, yes. Well,
for these benchmarks, we need
right.
this difficult dialogue, because we need
Right.
to come really to the understanding what is needed to have skillful and effective homeopaths.
Yeah, I think it's just a nomenclature. I think that benchmarks is what is called by the HMO, but the standards pretty much for us would be the benchmarks, basically. So it's just a linguistic variance, but we do have standards in education, in the community. I mean, LMHI and ECH.
Yeah.
I think one
Okay.
of the reasons why we don't go to the benchmark is this huge difference in the education and this house in our community. I think this is the most big obstacle for us to go further.
Yes, because it's even a bit difficult in Europe, but not so much, because it's a similar system. Most, not all, but most, to have medical training, and then afterwards they study homeopathy. But as you know, in the US, you have different systems how you can learn, and then we have India and countries around there who have completely different system. Also, as you mentioned, Ashley, South Africa, with universities where they have a university graduation in homeopathy and some kind of medicine within. And to get all of that into a boat that is including all these who are really working to offer high quality homeopathic education, and not to exclude these that for some reasons, like people are not starting to learn about homeopathy. If they hear, you need to study for 1,000 hours, then they say, okay, I'll do something else. Yeah. So how to get them into the boat and to make them then realize that, of course, it is like, I think like all good medical fields, it's a lifelong learning, and you get the desire to stay lifelong learning, but to create the interest in the very beginning, that they want to start it, that they feel it's I mean, at least I can just really talk about the Austrian situation. We had a time when it was difficult to become a doctor, because we had a huge number of people who made their MD, their degree, but then for the practical hospital training, you needed to wait. You needed to wait for, in some areas, 3 years. You didn't get you did something else in between. You worked as this, that, whatever, something like helping nurses, and there were quite some who started to study homeopathy. That was 3 years, perfect. In those 3 years, you could study quite a lot of homeopathy. But this is not today. Today we have a lack of doctors. And when someone studies medicine, it's got a big variety of possibilities, what you can do. And you have the bashing. You read in the newspapers, homeopathy is nonsense, homeopathic practitioners are cheaters, are taking the money for nothing, and things like that. So if you are a student or if you just finish your training, you don't want to be called someone who's taking the money out of the pockets of people for nothing. And these are the problems that we face. And on LMHI grounds, I think it's really a challenge that needs also people in the boat, that because at the moment, I think it's rather the Europeans working on it, people in the boat who have attended these completely different educations, like it is in India, like it is in South Africa, to create something like maybe the better solution is not to focus on how many hours you need to do on this and that, but on the skills you need to have. The skills you need to have to be a good homeopath.
And the attributes. And the
And
attributes. It's
yeah.
not just about skills, but you're right. For me, you're completely
What
right.
was the word?
It's
Sorry, I was just talking. I didn't
skills,
hear
knowledge, attributes.
competence, attributes. Okay.
Yeah,
What do you mean
because
by
the
attributes?
attributes, and that's really critical as well. But
Yeah.
you think about it, Claudia, and everybody else. The very, very strange shaped profession that is the naturopath, the naturopathic world, have got an understanding at the world and an arrangement with the World Health Organization around exactly this. Yeah. If the life coaches and if the anthroposophical folks and every other branch of complementary medicine are able to identify and define what is a homeopath and what do they need to have, then it's a very simple ask. I agree that there are challenges and local challenges in different countries, but you said let's get in the boat. Well, it's a strangely shaped boat, but I think political challenges are usually solved with personal relationships, and therefore everyone's got to get in the boat. Everyone that wants to be in the boat can be in the boat.
Can you explain a bit more what you mean by attributes?
A competency of an educational competency around an attribute would be in Hahnemanian language prejudice. Hahnemann says, aphorism blah 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 6, 7, 83, the unprejudiced observer. Now that is an attribute, that's not a skill, right? And so knowledge relates to the indications of pulsatilla. Skills relate to case management skills, but attributes relate to formation of character, the thing that Bernardo latched onto before. And the prejudice, being the unprejudiced observer, is one such example. Yeah. Natalia, what were you going to say?
Yes, thank you very much for all the approach. I agree that I think that we are more than mature, all the community, to start in depth this discussion. This discussion run in LMHI, it runs also in ECH, and not only on education, but we have in ECH a next generation working group. So to ask really the new students what they want and to have this view also. And as you said, I think that we have some common curriculum. We have gaps. And also, I think it's important that we see the noise, because there is also a lot of noise in our teachings, most of the teachings. So as you said, there is a shift, and we can do it to create more competent next generation homeopaths by less time, but more meaningful. As you said, that we need to
be focused on the basics. And again, on the basics, you mentioned many times, and I totally agree with that. Thank you.
See, yeah, thank you. I think that's a really great point. I don't like to scare people, but you know, sometimes some people are scared straight. You know that expression? Some people, you know, it's like there's challenges and there's difficulties and there's, you know, but I'm not going to change. You know, if we don't change now, there's a gap. And do you know who's filling the gap? Instagram influencers are running homeopathy schools, right? Not you, Instagram influencers. People, there is a thirst for knowledge about complementary medicine, natural medicine, and a massive challenge with attitudes towards conventional medicine. The gap is being filled, and well, and not to name names, but you know, the Australian school that has 2,000 students, that's run by an Instagram influencer, is going to be a bigger challenge for you than, you know, not than you know, fighting about should it be 100 hours or 150 hours. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, I think there's an urgency that I want to get across to you. And yeah, thanks, Natalia. Yeah.
Можно один момент обсудить на русском языке, просто чтобы мне было свободнее? Да, Вера, поможете?
Okay, we hear it in English also.
Нет, я тогда, no, I want to discuss one moment. This touch Claudia in her speech. Да, в ее речи, да. According to rules by LMCHI, the only doctor may to use the method of homeopathy. Only doctors.
I can answer that question.
Yeah. What do
The Liga
Это с одной стороны, on one side, it's very good, because only doctors have a clinical mind process. Only doctor. This clinical mind, clinical approach, clinical side formulation, some years.
The
Vera.
LMHI historically was a medical, in fact, it's called Liga Medicorum Homeopathica Internationale. So it was only medical doctors. But as Alastair has pointing out, the world moves and things change. And along the way, we have had to adapt to include other healthcare practitioners, licensed healthcare practitioners. So now we have naturopathic doctors. Dr. Lisa Marine, for example, who is the current president of the American Institute of Homeopathy, is a full member of the LMHI. So not just medical doctors, but people who are clinically trained. We have dentists, we have veterinarians as well as part of the membership. Now, because there are limitations in different countries, there are some people that cannot be members because they cannot practice homeopathy legally in their particular state. But we have BSHMs, for example, from India. We are not medical doctors, but they are licensed to use homeopathy in their country. So whoever is in the residency able to practice homeopathy can become a member of an organization that can be a member of the LMHI. So it's not just medical doctors, as long as they have license to practice medicine in their countries.
Well, I personally also think it's not a matter of a degree or not degree, but it's a matter of knowledge of whether you do have knowledge about where the, let's say, pathological limit is that you need to know for using homeopathy. That's rather that. I would say the pathological limit, or the how disease normally develops, how you get this knowledge the knowledge on the healthy body, the knowledge on diseases, and what limits and how much time you have with certain diseases. So how much time do you have, and how can you deal with the patient and tell him when he asks you, he will ask you for your advice. And if this is a medical degree or within a formation that offers also medical knowledge, seems not so important to me. But honestly, I think medical knowledge is necessary. I don't think, I personally don't want to be treated or wouldn't want to send someone that has studied homeopathy but does have no knowledge about the clinical, practical human body and diseases. This is my opinion on it.
I
Maybe
don't
there.
think you're going to have
And
anybody
wait,
that disagrees with that.
one minute. I want to discuss this problem because I think the homeopathy program can be two side. For one program for person who with medical education and for person without medical education.
Yes, of course, we do have that. I mean, we have countries like also in England, they have natural healers. They also have their programs, and it's a legal possibility there.
And that's what Alistair was talking about, how they have different curriculums depending on the person that's taking the course as well. Did I understand that correctly, Alistair?
Yeah. But I think there seems to be maybe an understanding, which is a misnomer, that those courses that train professional homeopaths teach no medical science. That I've never seen that anywhere in the world. I've taught in colleges all over every country. There is some medical science, and sometimes it's 100 hours, and sometimes it's 200 hours, and sometimes it's inadequate. The conversation has to be around that particular question. It's always the same thing. From my point of view, what I hear is a hesitancy around professional homeopathy, mystically around some sort of lack of clinical training or some sort of lack of medical science knowledge. And I think that's a simple conversation to have. In an unregulated field, as we have in the United States, there are some schools that would teach minimal medical science. And I, like you, agree that that's a real concern. To have no understanding of pharmacology, no understanding of pathological processes, I don't think that's that's healthy. But I don't agree if you think that, or if there's an opinion that you've got to be medically licensed to practice homeopathy, because it's just patently not the case. In many countries around the world, there is a very healthy, thriving, and responsible professional homeopathy community. Now, I happen to be a part of that, but I also totally respect and admire what goes on in this organization that, you know, has organized this conversation. But hopefully I've not hopefully I've passed on enough educational information and enough information from a different perspective, with enough urgency to highlight that we cannot get bogged down in old historical conversations. I think we have to move pretty quickly.
And one thing I asked, sorry.
No, you go.
Because I asked you on your experience in online teaching, and you said it's no difference. So is this what is your message, that you do the online teaching just the way you would do it in a classroom?
Well, if you talked 20 years ago about online learning was cheaper, of lower quality. Online learning was often a way to make lots of money quickly. There were legitimate concerns about the quality of online learning. I think online learning, there's some prejudices about online learning in different parts of the world, and most of them are legitimate. But that's not what we have now. And I would, and if there is a difference in quality between a student that comes out of a course having studied face to face and a student that comes out of a course having studied online, then show me that. I don't see any grade or mark differences between students that study courses in that way, and of course there are medical institutions around the world that are fully online. What is it? There's a university in Canada that is 100% taught online. These days the conversation in education is not about delivery mode, it's about quality given what's chosen. So yeah, I think just to reiterate the point, a live student is a live student, you know.
And how do you hold your exams?
Well, that's a great question, and I'm going to say that for the most part, examinations from an educational point of view are seen at our institution as the least effective way of ensuring competency and confidence. And so we have a rolling, varied, relevant way of assessing students' skills, knowledge, and attributes that doesn't involve the stress, the ridiculous stress of the final exam. That's the choice that we've made, and we're very comfortable with it. We know that we can assess students and their clinical competencies along the way because we see them every day. We see we hear the questions that come out of their mouths, and we can track that, and we do track that. There are some colleges in North America that do have a final exam, and some of those colleges are happy with the final exam, but just it's my own personal experience of education that a final examination is of minimal value. I'm sorry if that offends anybody.
No, absolutely not. No, it's very interesting. I think it's a very interesting point, because we also know, or we had it in our associations, that there were quite some who did their training and then it took years until they met the exam, and that's nonsense then, yeah.
Oh, and I'm sorry for one, because I may have, because the school itself doesn't have a final exam, but for licensure and certification, there is an exam. So all of the students that graduate from, say, the Academy of Homeopathy Education are then eligible to sit for the licensure in the state of Arizona, and certification. So there are exams to enter into the profession, but we just don't administer those particular exams. So that's an important point.
Okay, so this is an official qualification that they don't have automatically when they attended your school, but it's something else they need to do afterwards.
Yes, for entry into the profession in North America, as a professional, as a non-medically licensed integrative healthcare provider, yes, you're exactly right. We provide a parchment, we provide a diploma, and then they can sit for the exam to become certified or licensed. And for the AIH, for the medically licensed folks, that's an interesting one, because it's more of at this stage a membership organization, and then there's the opportunity to sit for an examination for the qualification that sits alongside of the AIH, the American Institute of Homeopathy.
Okay.
And what is the minimum medical standard which people have to cover to become professional homeopaths in America?
So for professional homeopaths, the standard is a anatomy, physiology, and pathophysiology course of and then there's different ways of demonstrating quality, but the number of hours that is given is inadequate. The number of hours is 90.
Mm-hmm.
Inadequate. I think this is the most difficult dialogue we have to start to talk and to agree what means to be medically prepared to become a homeopath.
I agree with you.
That was
Lee?
the easy solution in Europe, to say you need to have the medical formation first, because then you need to have these hours. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was interested.
Okay, and then the restrictions and the consequences of that decision. So again, you know, that statement around, well, Claudia, if I heard you right, it's easier if we just limit it to medically qualified folks, immediately limits all sorts of extraordinarily high skilled and quality homeopaths that are denied entry into the profession, or denied you know, membership of Liga, or you know, it just seems to me that a limitation like that is almost shooting the profession in the foot.
I would say, I'll give an example. You cannot become an engineer just like that. If you want to be an engineer, you learn for engineer. If you don't learn for engineer, you learn for a technician at some level. And so everything is I mean, every profession has done this. Even in the medical field, if you are not a doctor, then you can be a bachelor degree. In Bulgaria, we have it now. It's called like medical doctor's assistant or so on. They study 4 years and they work in the villages separately, because there are not enough doctors, but they have their medical minimum. And then you have the nurses, and then you have the midwives, and so on. And this is fully absent in our profession. If we speak for homeopathy as a profession, we just have to make the right order for every group with the appropriate medical knowledge. And then I think we will have all these fantastic people who are skilled and well in thinking, and they can become very brilliant homeopaths. They also need to cover some standard of medical knowledge and skills. This is part of the game. If you want to be in this profession, you need to have this and these qualities. I think this is the same in naturopathic medicine and in any other field.
And in some countries, it's a legal thing also. Yeah. But I think this is a longer discussion, and most of all, I meant it's the easier solution, because it's harder if you have to think on what somebody needs to know when he did not study medicine, to have enough medical knowledge to be prepared for treating disease. That's the point. In Austria, for example, there are people who are homeopaths, but they're not allowed to treat people with disease. They are only allowed to be a health consultant or something like this. Yeah. But it's actually what I wanted to ask you, because I think it's a very important point, is something very different. Again, I focus on the kind of, let's not say examination, but evaluation, because I think evaluation can also be a motivation for students, and I think it's very important in a training to have examination, not examination, but evaluation of whether you're good on your way. And how are you doing that in your school? That's what I wanted to know. How do you evaluate or motivate them, to show them, maybe you should study more on that, or study more on that, to have your competences for treating them?
I mean, do you really want me to talk about it? It's really boring. I mean, we have assessment. I call that assessment. You call it evaluation. Assessment is got to be in any institution. It's got to be varied, and it's got to be relevant. It's got to be equitable, and it's got to be applied, and it's got to be moderated. All of those terms you'll be hopefully familiar with. So if we're assessing or evaluating repertory, then we have our repertorial assessments that are graded and moderated. Moderated either with another school or another institution that has a similar kind of assessment. And so pre-moderation, post-moderation, educational processes for that particular assessment tool. If we're thinking about assessing skills and knowledge around the fundamental philosophies of homeopathy, then there's a series of essays that are written, graded, and again, moderated. If it is relating to clinical competencies, that's much more difficult. And the way that we do that is by firstly identifying the 32 clinical competencies that are required of a homeopath, and we have a series of there's some of those competencies are signed off by supervisors that are identifying any competencies which are missing when they are supervising the case taking and then the case management and the case analysis of students once they get into supervision. And then before that, we have a series of meetings whereby the other competencies that are assessed emerge. For example, a competency that is sometimes talked about in our school is around the homeopath's ability to communicate clearly with their client. Right? It's a competency. It's a necessary skill. Sometimes the competency might be that the student is having trouble individually with accepting the direction of a supervisor, and they're resisting that. Now, if that's noticed by the supervisor or in any other way, then that's brought up at our clinical competency meeting, and the tracking of all of the students, the competency is identified, what's missing. Communication goes to the student. If required, there's remedial sanctions, and sometimes there's additional cases that student is required to participate in. So I think you get the idea that by not having an examination doesn't mean we're not assessing. We're assessing very, very heavily. Teaching and learning is all about the learning, and you only know if people are learning by assessing and by evaluating, using your word, the student. So, yep, I think those are a couple of examples. We have 42 specific assessment pieces in our program, and some of them are multiple choice quizzes. Some of them relate to critical and clinical reflections, just as you would find in a nursing program these days.
Who has defined these 33 competences? It is your personal school, or is it some general view?
In North America, for 6 years, to burn off my karma or for my sins, I was the president of ACHINA. And so ACHINA is the Accreditation Commission for North American Homeopathy Education, ACHINA. And that body accredits schools that teach homeopathy. Now, there's a document which drives the activity of the Accreditation Commission and the certification body, now 2 certification bodies, which is called the Standards and Competencies Document for North American Homeopathy. And that Standards and Competencies, it's owned by the community. It's a community-based document, and the community says, this is what we think a homeopath should have and do, right? And so when Bernardo said the ECH and Liga have a document, they do, but everyone's got a different document. These documents need to be unified. Anyway, the point is that document specifies clinical competencies and standards. And then Denise and myself have looked at those and said, we don't think they're enough. And so we've added additional standards and competencies to our students' requirements in our school. We don't think that the Achina requirements are enough, and so we've added additional requirements. In the same way that we've said that we don't believe that the medical science hours are enough, and so our requirements are different in our school. Every school's got the opportunity to do that. Standards and competencies aren't in a healthcare field are designed to produce a competent school and a competent graduate, not a brilliant school or a brilliant graduate. That's up to the schools, and that's up to the individual curriculum, right? But the standards create the baseline of what is the, I feel like the minimum standards. Yeah.
And have you written them down, the requirements and your additional requirements?
Of course, we have our compliance. Yeah, I mean, my God, yes, we have.
Can we get them somehow? I think this is very useful for our discussions.
Sure. The standards and competencies documents in the public domain, I can provide that to you, and I can also give you our 31 clinical competencies, our school competencies.
Great. That's really great. That's very helpful for our benchmarks and our work all over the
Sure.
world.
Yeah. No, I think it's really important. And in the same way, see, in the Academy of Homeopathy has had a problem in North America because none of the other schools want to play with us. None of the other schools want to moderate with us. And there's a degree to which, we've created a problem because we just say, no, your standard's not good enough. No, your standards are not good enough. It should be like this. And so we've got ourselves in a bit of trouble like that. However, the Faculty of Homeopathy in the UK are the people we benchmark against. Now, the faculty in and of itself is not a school, right? So the Faculty of Homeopathy, you all know that, that's run by, well, the educational secretary is Ubraj at the moment. And Ubraj is very willing to share quiz banks, policies, standards, and so that's where we do a lot of our moderation with. We should be doing it with other schools, but there's not a lot of other schools.
Okay, but with them it works.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you very much, and this was such a good discussion. I really appreciate, really appreciate. Many
I'm
thanks.
so sorry that I talked for 90 minutes because I thought that we were just going to talk for 90 minutes, but it's suddenly
we
it's
talk much longer. Yes. I'm not sorry. I'm very happy. Thank you very much that you gave us you gave this time to the LMHI members who wanted to listen.
It's an absolute delight. And once again, thank you all for coming and for your attention and your contributions. And I'd like to leave you with just that sense of urgency again, that we can't let this get caught up in personalities and political machinations notwithstanding. Let's get on the boat